Hi everyone, this is Lynn from Yoga Story, and we're going to do a little virtual Yoga 101. Whether you're wanting to come into a studio to take live classes, and if you are watching this anytime during 2020, yes, we have taken a lot of appropriate measures to make sure that you can do so safely. Or if you're wanting to start a yoga practice virtually, I want to make sure that you're armed with the things that you need to know, some tips and hints, so that you can do so safely. And then at the very end of this video, there is going to be a little special for you for doing the whole 60 minutes so that you can save some money on either one of those options. And we also are taping this in 4 different segments, so you'll see me change outfits and it will fade in and out, but that's what we've got it categorized into. And this first part, our tips and hints, frequently asked questions, some etiquette, and some things that you'll need to come prepared with. Then we're going to cover some poses, some props that we use, some poses, standing poses, and poses on the ground. So that's how we've got this Yoga 101 sectioned out for you. So for this first part, let's talk about what to expect when you come into a studio physically. So if you're going to come into a studio physically, then you can come in the front door. We've got a couple of different safety precautions in place, so make sure that you research ahead of time, whatever studio that you're going to make sure that they have those precautions in place. But feel free to come and talk to the front desk. We always welcome our new clients and give them a little tour of the area and help them get set up. Now make sure that you go to the studio's website. If you go to our website, we have descriptions and times of all the classes. If you're brand new to yoga, no matter what your physical level is, I highly recommend that you start with a beginner's class, just so that you can learn some of the basic positions, the modifications that you can do in those positions, and so that you can get familiar with the yoga language. We have a ton of poses in yoga and lots of transitions and ways to get there. So in order for you to be safe, I recommend starting with those beginner classes as opposed to jumping into some of the more powerful ones, the ones that go a little bit quicker, where your risk of injury might go up a little bit more if you don't know what you're doing. Speaking of, you are enough, just as you are. Even if you don't do all of the poses, simply start where you are with what you have, and that's enough. So even if you need to go to child's pose in the middle of class, even if you're like, my pose doesn't look like that person's pose, that is fine, because every body in a class is going to be different, not only in our physical level of fitness of where we're at, but in the way that we're put together. So there are as many ways to do a pose as there are bodies. And the point of doing yoga, especially at our studio, we really emphasize the actual goal of yoga, which is the goal of ridding ourselves of this mental disruption in our heads, being able to focus, de-stress, get a little bit of challenge physically, but then to be able to emotionally and mentally reset so that we're more peaceful inside, so that we can take that off the mat. So it's not, while handstands are really fun, that's not the goal of a yoga class, okay? So that's what I want you to remember if you're gonna come in physically to a studio. And talk to the front desk person, talk to the teachers, email us ahead of time. We love questions, because we want to know where you are at physically, if you have any injuries, and what your goals are. You might be able to do marathons back to back to back, but your goal is to just de-stress and get a nice deep stretch. Well, that goal is going to change what my suggestion is for you class-wise based on your physicality and your goal. Now, come prepared with form-fitting clothing. So I wore something that's a little bit more loose, and I'm going to show you why. Yoga pants are great. They, of course, don't have to be any specific brand. Yoga pants are fine. Shorts are fine too. I would just suggest that they be form-fitting, or if you're a guy, to have some of those bicycle shorts underneath any loose shorts. Same thing for women. If you want to wear loose shorts, I would just recommend some form-fitting bicycle shorts underneath, because of the positions that we put our legs in, so that you don't got anything flopping out, right? So I also recommend form-fitting shirts, and I usually don't practice too much in this. We are okay if you want to take a shirt off, as long as you've got a bra on underneath for women. We want everybody to feel free and comfortable with your bodies here, so feel free to do that if you'd like. But the reason why we recommend a more form-fitting shirt is because we do things like this. And sometimes that shirt or downward facing dog might come up. This one's staying in place pretty good, so of course it's not going to be a really great example, but it's starting to come up a little bit. It might come up around your ears, it might come up around your shoulders and inhibit some of your movement. If it makes you feel comfortable that your shirt is up around your armpits a little bit, that's fine. Like I said, we want everybody to feel comfortable with their body here, regardless of their clothing, but a little bit more form-fitting shirt will stay down and that might not distract you during your practice. Okay, so that's the first thing that we recommend is workout clothing, something that's a little bit more form-fitting. We don't recommend cotton clothing just because it doesn't breathe very well. Plus, it tends to trap odors really well. So once you start to then sweat in that cotton clothing, go home and wash it, it doesn't release all those odors, and then you come back and then after a while you get the stinky gym clothes situation. And that's just unpleasant for you. We're used to all sorts of smells here, so we don't really mind it so much. But that's our recommendation for clothing. Now, our recommendation for mats. You definitely don't have to have your own yoga mat when you come into Yoga Story. We do have mats to rent, and we make sure that they're properly sanitized and air dried afterwards so that for overnight, so that there's plenty of time for that surface to be completely disinfected. There are a couple of different types of mats. I'm going to come a little bit closer to the camera so you can kind of see. There's these kinds that are real bumpy, and then there are kinds that are smooth. And those smoother ones tend to be a whole lot more sticky, but it often depends on the person and how much oil you have in your hands. We rent a couple of different types of mats for people to try out different mats before they buy one, but this is our standard one. And this is one that after you use it, if this is what you own, I highly recommend cleaning it with an alcohol, vinegar, and tea tree solution with water diluted, and then air drying it so that it doesn't become a musty smell. But if you rent it, we do that for you. But these kind absorb water a little bit more, so you definitely want to air dry them. The ones that are more smooth and really sticky don't absorb as much water, but I still recommend the same cleaning solution, and then from time to time air drying it so that it doesn't trap that musty smell in, because this is how a lot of people store their yoga mats. They roll them up. And if you do this while it's still wet with either sweat or cleaning solution, it doesn't give it a chance to fully air dry, and then it becomes this little stinky, sweaty smell, right? And if you're taking a class in which you're moving a lot, even our beginners classes, you do move quite a bit, and everybody sweats at different levels because we all have different sweat glands in our bodies, then I recommend bringing a towel and some water to class. Because it's always good that if you're going to start moving your body, especially if that might not be part of your everyday routine right now, if you're just getting started with physical movement, or if you're just getting started with yoga, yoga movement is different than running, it's different than weightlifting. So your body might react a little bit differently to that, and we always recommend that everybody be hydrated when they come to class, and then making sure that you hydrate whenever you feel thirsty during class, and just make sure it's a closed container so that it doesn't spill if it gets knocked over. Okay, so the only mat that I don't recommend are the very thick, cushy mats that you'll oftentimes find in gyms. And they use those mats because you're not using them normally for a yoga practice. You're using them to do any of your exercises that you might be on hands and knees on your back at the gym. Now, the reason why I don't recommend those is because when we do our standing postures in yoga, we usually take really wide stances like this. This is an example of Warrior Two. And what happens with those really thick, cushy mats when you're standing on them is they start to spread. So that's really awkward when you're trying to hold a pose like this and your feet start to do this out from underneath you. Splits is a very advanced posture, and we don't want to do that if we are not ready for it, if we're not an advanced and been practicing for a long time yogi, right? So water, mat, more workout type of form-fitting clothing, hair up if you've got longer hair, just because it in your face might be a little distracting or annoying to you as you practice. And then you'll notice the teacher will talk a lot about your breath and your breathing, because one of the biggest benefits of yoga, as we do our physical postures, even if it's just stretching on the mat, is learning how to breathe. And you're like, well, don't we all know how to breathe? Yes and no. It's just like we all know how to move, but we may not be doing the movement that's most healthy for our bodies. We all know how to breathe, but we may not be breathing in the way that helps our central nervous system, so this part of the brain, calm us down, or give us the biggest capacity, the most full oxygenated capacity of our lungs. And so your teacher will talk a lot about how you breathe, breathing from the belly, ujjayi breathing when you are in class. And they'll kind of walk you through that, the restriction at the back of the throat. But breathing, so if you hear real noisy breathing, or if the teacher talks a lot about breathing, that's why. So hopefully now you feel a little bit more prepared to come into class doing what you can with what you have, and knowing that that is completely enough. You don't have to do all the postures. Your postures are going to look different from someone else. Ask questions. If you have a question after class with a pose that the teacher did and you feel like maybe you're not doing it right, we get that a lot. I feel like I'm not doing this pose right. Please ask us a question. We are more than happy to take a little bit of time to break down a single posture. If you feel like maybe all of your postures are not being done right, or if you have extensive questions, please book a one-on-one session with your teacher, a private session, because we really want you to be successful. Because when you feel successful, you're going to be consistent in your practice, and that's where results come from. Whether your results, are you wanting them to be physical, or like we said, if you're wanting to be more of that complete goal of yoga, we're really looking at people as a whole and holistic approach to your body. Then the only way that that's going to happen is if you are consistent and successful. And we definitely want to help you be successful here at Yoga Story. So, and above all, if you stuck with me this long, hopefully you have, because we have another 45 minutes to go, is make sure that you're physically cleared, medically cleared by your doctor to be able to start any physical yoga practice. So the next couple of portions of these videos are going to get into more of the physical practice. Our blocks and our straps, our standing poses and our poses down on the ground, which you can do along with me. Make sure you don't have any injuries that would prevent you from being able to do these things safely, that your doctor isn't going to say, you really shouldn't be doing yoga for X, Y, or Z, and that they know that you're going to start a yoga practice if you're currently under medical condition, have a medical condition or under their medical care, okay? All that good liability stuff. All right, so I hope you continue to watch for the next portion as we go through. So now we're going to talk about props. Unless you're taking a yin or restorative class, the most commonly used props will be blocks and straps. If you're going to take a yin or a restorative class, then you're going to have a whole lot more props, blankets, bolsters, blocks, and straps. But for a beginner's style class, so a class that is simply going to kind of walk you into a flow style, you'll most likely just have blocks and a strap. Now, this isn't cheating. Using blocks and straps are ways to, A, make your arms and legs a little bit longer, B, create a little bit more stability in a pose, or C, help you get a little bit deeper, more safely into a pose. So we're going to go through those three things. So first, everybody's arms and legs are different lengths, right? I always say it's really easy for me to touch my toes because my arms and legs pretty much the same length, right? So I'm pretty proportional that way. Now, I have friends of mine that have really long legs, and so bending over to be able to touch their toes is a little harder for them because of the length of their legs, and maybe they have a shorter torso. Now think of that in reverse. Maybe you have longer arms and shorter legs. It might be harder for you to do some of the poses where you have to step your foot forward. So let's go through how we can use the blocks to help us in some of those poses. So when we use the blocks, we can use them in a low lunge to help get our hands, basically bringing the floor up to your hands. Okay? Because maybe we don't have the ability, and it might be a mobility thing, and it might be an arm and leg length thing to get our hands flat on the floor. It may not be necessary to get our hands flat on the floor. So we can use them in a low lunge to be able to bring the floor up a little bit closer to us. Okay? We can also use them in, say, if we'd like to bring our hands to a block in a forward fold. Okay? We can also use them in a balancing posture. And this brings us to the next portion. This is also kind of bringing the floor up a little closer to our hand, and it's also creating a little bit more stability in this posture. This is a half moon pose. Okay? So using the blocks for those different types of things will help you get into poses a little bit more safely. Now let's take a look and see how we can use the strap to help us deepen a posture more safely. We're going to use it in a forward fold, where we place the strap around the feet, and I'm going to hold on to the strap. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my sitting bones, and then I'm going to gently walk my hands up the strap. That helps me keep my spine straight. It helps me get a little bit deeper into the hamstring stretch without compromising my back. Okay? Now, an example of how to use a strap for stability in a posture. Say we'd like to progress our extended leg raise from here to a straight leg. Well, I can use the strap around my foot because maybe my arm is too short to reach my toe. Maybe I have a really long leg, or maybe that's just not necessary to put that much stress in my hamstring. It may be bad for your hamstring to do that in your body. We can use the strap around the foot, hold it with our arm, still maintain the proper form in our upper body to be able to do an extended leg raise. So straps, again, are a great way to help you, bring the ground up a little bit closer to your hand. Here's an example in a standing pose. Okay? Or create a little bit more stability in a posture. Here's an example in a different balancing pose. Or help us get deeper in a pose a little more safely. We'll use the block for a seated, cross-ankled hip stretch. And we're sitting on the block. Okay? There's a lot of other ways to use a block, supported bridge, waterfall, that are more restorative, and we'll go through that when we get to the last part of our Yoga 101 online version, when we talk about doing poses on the mat that are usually at the end of class. Hi everyone, it's time for part 3 of our virtual Yoga 101, and this is where we're going to go through some 10 common poses of a yoga practice, and we're going to apply some modifications that you can do and apply our props to it. So the 10 poses that we're going to go through are downward facing dog, plank pose, chair pose, warrior 1, warrior 2, high lunge, applying some twists to our poses, side angle and triangle and the difference between the two. And then finally we'll cover one back bend bridge pose. Okay, so let's start with our first pose, downward facing dog. Now I'll show you what I see a lot of times in this pose, especially in beginners, and then we'll cover kind of some of the main purposes of the pose and some different modifications that you can make. Now oftentimes what I see is looks more like a plank pose as opposed to a downward facing dog. And that's oftentimes beginners are kind of curious. They may look around a little bit and try to figure out, am I doing this right? Or they're real tight in their hamstrings and it's hard, or their lats, which is a back muscle that attaches into the arm. And they might be tight there and it might be hard for them to press back and into the pose. Now, a couple of purposes of the pose. Now you do get a little bit of chest opening, really mainly in this part right here. But that's not the main intention of the pose, because if we rely solely on that, we're going to lose some stability in the shoulders. So a modification that you can do is making sure your hands are as wide or wider than your shoulders. More narrow is less stable. So take them as wide as feels comfortable in your shoulders. And then we want to think about wrapping in. That's going to create stability in the shoulders. So wrapping in with the arms as opposed to flying out with the elbows. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we spread our fingers, nice space in the hands. We're going to lift up and back. We want our ears to kind of be level with the biceps. So you can see that I'm just doing this so you can see ears are level with the biceps. And I'm going to stare at my ankles. And then I'm just wrapping in with my arms, little bend in the elbows. And now my shoulders are nice and secure. Now, if we are holding this pose for a while and you feel your arms start to shake, feel free to bring the knees down. Also in downward facing dog, you can bend the knees as much as you need to, maybe walk the feet in so that your tailbone can be up high in the sky and you can pull your belly in to secure your midsection. So I'll turn to the side so you might be able to see that a little better. This is a great downward facing dog. So you don't have to look like this completely in the pose. We don't have to get our heels down to the ground for this to be a good downward facing dog. We also want to kind of get rid of those words good and bad, because everybody is different. Everybody's going to do a pose a little bit differently. But once you kind of understand the intention of the pose and some main themes and goals of the pose, then you kind of know where you need to adjust in your body to head that way. Now everybody's body, like I said, is different, so you're going to feel it differently in your body than somebody else, but once you keep those things in mind, you can adjust properly. Okay, so that's downward facing dog. The next one is plank pose. So plank pose in our yoga terms, we call it plank, high plank to low plank is chaturanga dandasana. We won't go through low plank because I do consider that to be an advanced posture or something that you do in more of a power class. But plank pose is often done plank to downward facing dog in a beginner's class or plank to your belly. So let's talk about the key components of plank pose. So plank is, chaturanga dandasana is four-limbed staff pose. So I want you to think about your whole body working together to be nice and strong and energized and stiff like a staff. So it is this pose, but with our hands and our toes against the ground, right? And we can always bend the knees and still be in a plank pose. So let's set this up, hands down. And we want our hands underneath our shoulders, or they can be slightly in front if our wrists don't bend all the way to 90 degrees like this. Not everybody's wrists bend like that, and that's fine. So if you need to have your hands a little bit more in front of your shoulders, that's great. So I start with my hands underneath my shoulders and as wide as my shoulders. Remember that principle, more narrow is less stable, wider is more stable. And lift the knees. You really want to think of energy in your thighs here. And then gaze down at the ground, maybe a couple of inches in front of your eyes so that our neck is neutral. So So we don't want to be looking up like this, and we don't want to have our head drop down like that. The other thing that you want to remember in a plank pose is to keep the lower part of your belly right in here lifted so that our hips are not sagging down towards the ground. So you can see I'm kind of sagging down and I'm dropping into my shoulders. So I want to pull my low belly up so my hips are in line with my shoulders. I have strong legs, a strong belly, strong hips and strong shoulders, neutral neck. Now we can always bring the knees down to the ground and still be in a plank pose. Okay? Now, I need to edit that. All right, our next pose is going to be chair pose. I'll make sure that okay, I did start that, okay. 3, 2, 1. All right, our next pose is chair pose. Now, in chair pose, we want to think of it as a squat, but with our feet and our legs closer together. Usually when we do squats, we do our feet wider, which is a perfectly acceptable way to do chair pose if that feels more comfortable on your knees and your hips. In a traditional yoga class, we start with our feet together and our knees together. Then we want to think of this as a bend at the knees and a bend at the hips as we sit back and down. So you can see how my knees are closer to stacked over my ankles. I'll lose my balance there. As opposed to our knees being way far forward over our toes. So thinking of pushing back through our hips, keeping the knees bent and more lined up over our ankles. Now, if pushing back through the hips causes you low back pain, then don't bend as much through the knees. And we can still be supported by our hips and our thighs here. So the main goals of this purpose is to create strength in the thighs, strengthen the hips and your glutes, and then strengthen your low back as well. So oftentimes people get a little concerned about feeling this part of the muscles start to kind of burn a little bit. And as long as it's not sharp shooting pain, a little burning sensation in this muscular part. Think of like if you're holding a pose on a leg, you can feel your muscles here start to burn, right? You might feel the muscles here burn a little bit. That means they're getting stronger, which is a good thing. Sometimes we have a little tension in our shoulders, and it's hard to hold our arms up over our head in chair pose. So take them wider. That gives you more space in your shoulders, and it still helps you strengthen in this pose so that we're strengthening the lower half of our body into our low back. We use our core to help brace us. So think of pressing in with the belly and up like this. Not lifting the shoulders up around the ears. Sit nice and low, chair pose. Good job. Okay. All right, moving on to some of our standing poses with one foot in front and one foot behind us. Warrior One is one of our classic poses. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to set this up. So Warrior One has one foot. I'll start with this foot facing forward, and our toes are at 12 o'clock. We have a bend in the knee, and the knee, we want it to be right over the ankle. Same thing as in chair pose, we don't want it to be over the toes, and then we don't want our knee to be collapsing in towards the middle of our body. So think about a line that divides us down. We don't want our knee coming into the middle of the body. We want it pressing out towards the edge of our mat, or our baby toe edge side of our foot. So right where this little edge is. And what that does when we do that, when we come from here to pressing out, is helps muscles in the hips start to strengthen. Good muscles in the hips start to strengthen. Of course, we're still feeling this quadricep muscle right here begin to engage and strengthen. And as always, we want our belly pressing in and up to help stabilize our midsection. Now, what's this back foot doing? Now, this is an important distinction between Warrior One and Warrior Two. Our back foot is out into the side. Now, it doesn't have to be all the way 90-degree angle out to the side. We can turn our toes up a little bit because the distinction between warrior one and warrior two is which way our hips and our chest is facing. Warrior one, our hips and our chest is facing forward, like this. In warrior two, we're opened to the side. So in warrior one, remember, our feet do not have to be lined up like this. Okay? We can take our feet a little bit wider so that our hips and our chest can face forward. Our back toes don't have to be completely out to the side. We can bring them forward as well. And then that way we can bend into the knee, maintain that tracking of the knee over the ankle, knee pressing outward, not inward, and hands up overhead. Warrior one. Now, a good way to modify this is if we start to feel like this is too much intensity in the thigh or in the knee, is to back off that bend just a little bit. Now, like I said, the difference between warrior one and our next pose, warrior two, is the way that our hips and our chests are facing. This leg bone is staying the same, so it's externally rotating. And we're pressing our hips forward and our chest forward in warrior one. And in warrior two, we're going to rotate out to the side as well. So sometimes I have to adjust my feet, which is perfectly fine. And in warrior two, this is our widest stance in our standing postures with one foot in front. Now, and it's a little bit easier than for our toes to be turned out to the side. And we have our arms out, and we're gazing over our middle finger. So just like the name, this warrior pose cultivates a lot of strength in our body. It's our legs, it's our belly always pulling in to help secure us. It's our shoulders pressing down, because in a lot of our normal life, we're up like this. Okay, so we want to think of pressing down gently with the shoulders, and that's going to create some strength and some muscles around our shoulder blades that we don't use a lot of. So bend into the knee, cultivate the strength in the lower half. Same concept of pressing the knee out to the side so it doesn't fall in. Press, 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 press. Create strength here. Stability in the midsection. Strengthen the arms. As we reach out, we're going to isometrically energize the muscles. That means we're holding without moving the muscles, and gaze over that front middle finger. So that is warrior two. All right, now we're moving to high lunge pose. So the big difference between our warrior poses and high lunge is the positioning of the back leg and where the foot is. In our warrior poses, the back leg is rotated out, and we're either turned into a different position with our upper body, here or here. In a high lunge position, this back leg is going to be neutral, and we're up on our toes. And it makes it a whole lot more easy for our hips and our chest to be facing forward, but it is a little bit more of a balance on that back leg. So same principles, knee tracking over the ankle, not towards the middle, pressing it out towards the side. We can really use our belly to help us stabilize, always breathing, of course, lifting the hands without creating tension in the neck. High lunge. So high lunge pose is also a great alternative to warrior one. If warrior one creates a little bit too much pressure in this back knee, we can come up on the toes. And then something to practice in warrior one is creating a lot of strength, or high lunge pose is creating a lot of strength in this back thigh muscle, this quadricep muscle. Now here's a modification. If your hips are a little tight, sometimes we have jobs that have us sitting all day long and it can create some tightness in the hip flexors, then bend the knee, this back knee just a little bit to help you get past that tightness. Because if we have tightness here and we try to lock this back leg out, we might feel a little bit of too much pressure in this portion of our back. So a little hack there is to bend the knee just a little bit. You can still create some energy here in the thigh. and we still have a strong high lunge pose. All right, let's take it a little step further, and we want to add some twists to our postures. So in twists, we want to remember that we twist from the belly up through the upper back. We always want to create stability in the hips when we twist, because our spine does not have the ability to twist real well from this part. We don't want this part to really be twisting. We want the upper back to twist, and we want to use the muscles here to do so. So twists are a great way to help our core engage and to help us get a little bit more mobility in the upper back and to create stability in our hips. But in order to do this, we want to make sure that I don't know why it does that. In order to do this, we want to make sure to do it safely. So we're going to start with what we call a simple twist. So a simple twist, we use our hands as opposed to our elbows. So I'll show you what we normally do in a power class. We come down real deep and we use our elbows. So in, say, a chair twist, we usually twist in chair and in lunges. Instead, we're going to use our hand. So we get into our chair position, and I'm going to use my left hand and send it across to my right knee. Then I'm going to bring my right hand to my heart. And then I begin to twist towards my right. I keep my hips nice and stable, and I'm twisting from my upper back and my core. Other side looks like this. Right hand to the left knee, left hand to the heart. I'm going to twist and extend. So same thing with a lunge position. One foot is forward, one foot is back. This is my right knee, so I'm going to take my left hand to my right knee. And I begin to twist from the belly and from the upper back, and I reach my right hand out as I twist to my right. Let's do the other side. Remember, stability in the lower half of the body. Use the core. Twist from the core through the upper back while maintaining nice, stable hips. Good. All right, so that's applying twists to chair and high lunge. Now, we're going to learn the difference between side angle and triangle and how to use a block with them. So side angle, we start with the same posture that warrior two is like. A bend in the knee, back foot is flat, toes turned out to the side. And it's even, we usually actually start from warrior two and we come down into side angle. Now here's a couple of ways. So again, we make sure we have that same alignment as we did in warrior two. And we can bring the forearm to the thigh and lift the other hand up or over. Now, something common that I see in this pose is this right here, where we really rest into our arm and the thigh. And what I want to encourage you to do is to use this shoulder muscle and use your belly muscles to help pull you up out, so that we're not resting just in our arm and our leg, but we're also using our upper body muscles to help us out in this pose. Now, if you're like, I think I might be able to go a little deeper, you can use that block to put your hand on while you still maintain the alignment of the lower half of the body, and you reach with the upper half and plant the hand on that block. That is side angle pose. Now, the difference between side angle and triangle is this front leg. Side angle, we have a knee bent really deeply, knee over the ankle, and it creates, again, that nice stability in the hip and the opening in the inner thigh. In triangle, as we straighten this leg, now remember, we don't have to lock it out. We can keep a little bend there, especially if we have tightness in the inner thigh or the hamstring. Now, because we bend the knee, it's not safe then to rest on this more straight leg like it is in side angle, where we can kind of shelf it a little bit. So this is where the block becomes pretty important. We really want to press into our feet to help us stabilize our weight in this pose. And then we're going to tilt ourselves forward as we bring the hand to the block. Now, in this pose, it's important not to rotate and put too much pressure in the back part of our low back, and instead think of kind of like we apply that twist, rotate the heart to the side, lift the hand up, and the arm can just be right here, it doesn't have to be way back or way far forward, just right here and somewhere in the middle, pressing into our feet. It creates a lot of stability in our lower half of our body. Okay. All right, our final pose that we are going to tackle today is one of our back bending poses, and it's called bridge pose. So bridge pose is on our back, and when we think of back bending poses help create strength in the back, but we also have to remember to use our belly, our hips, and our legs. So we've been practicing all of that with our We've been practicing all of that with our different postures here on the mat with our standing postures. So we're going to apply that now on the ground. So we want to make sure that our knees are right over our ankles. And then again, the same principle, we don't want our knees collapsing together. We want them right over our ankles. We're going to have strong thighs, strong hips, and a strong back. So hands come down by our sides. We're going to press into our heels and just lift our hips gently up off the mat. And then start to walk the shoulder blades together. So we're going to think of them drawing in towards the spine and keep that strong lower base as we press and lift the hips up. And you're going to feel the glute muscles, your butt muscles engage, but we also want to make sure that our thigh muscles and our inner thigh muscles are engaged too. So you can even think about or actually use the block to help you engage. So you can bring the block between the knees, and that makes the inner thigh muscles and your thigh muscles here help you engage as you press into the mat and lift up bridge pose. And remember, bridge pose does not have to look like this with your hips up really high in the air, as all that can do for a lot of people is create low back pain. You can use the block too, especially because we usually do more than one bridge pose. Sometimes it's just one, but oftentimes we do more than one. And you can use this block underneath the hips after a couple of bridge poses if your low back is getting tired or if it's starting to create a little bit of too much tension to rest your hips on. And this is a really great hip flexor opener, these muscles right here on the front of the hips, and a low back lengthener. And it just feels really good too after being seated for a long time. All right, so now we're going to tackle some balance poses. Now remember, balance, it's going to be different on different days and different time of the day. So you balance better in the middle of the day and the end of the day than you do at the beginning of the day. And that's because balance uses a lot of really teeny tiny muscles in your feet and in your shins, your ankles, and your hips. And sometimes they're not really awake at the beginning of the day. So I want you to think about the four corners of your feet. We talk about that a lot in yoga, and that's just right here at the base of your big toe and the base of your little toe. And then think of 2 points in the bottom of your heel. So we want to plant without gripping with our toes into the mat. And again, always we want to think of our low belly pressing in and up without lifting our shoulders up. And then we'll just do a classic tree pose, and you can kickstand it. So this is still balance. And on this standing leg, we want to think of this outer hip helping us stabilize. So this could be a fine tree pose. Remember, you can always use a wall to help you as well. And in our balance poses, we want to avoid putting a foot on this knee joint. So we go below the knee joint, or if you have the hip mobility to become above the knee joint, that's great. It doesn't make this pose any more magical. You just want to avoid the knee. Same thing as our triangle poses. We keep a little bit of a bend in our standing knee, just a little bit, so that we don't lock that joint out. because then that's using the joint as opposed to the muscle. We really want to use muscle in our balance poses. Now, a lot of times, and this is a way to help us progress, and we covered this earlier in our how to use straps and blocks, but we can use straps in some of our balance poses to help us progress the balance pose. This would be extended leg raise from here before we can come to here. We can use that strap to help us out. Okay, so that's just some things to think about in our balance poses. Hi everybody. So this is the last portion of our virtual Yoga 101, and we are going to work on the poses that we do on the mat. We're going to start off with one back bend bridge pose. Then we're going to move to forward folds, hip openers, and twists. Then finally, we're going to end with some advice on beginning your new yoga practice. And then we're going to give you a code so that you can get some money off our in-person Yoga 101 class, which goes more into depth and covers more poses, plus a code to get some money off our 30 for 30 offer. Now, if you, that's all in studio classes, and if you prefer to do things virtually, we have a great intro offer that's $10 for 1 week unlimited, and then some really affordable ways to attend classes virtually. $8 for a drop-in, $25 for 1 week unlimited, or $50 a month for monthly unlimited. And we have all sorts of styles of classes. But let's start first with our back bend called bridge pose. Now, bridge pose is a hip lift from the ground. And when you think of back bends, it's kind of that term back bend is a little bit misleading because we think of it as, well, we really need to bend our spine. Instead, I want you to think of it as a back stabilizing and heart opening pose. When we talk about heart opening, heart just means chest. And that's one of the things about yoga is that we kind of have our own language. So heart opening just means chest opening. So those are the two main concepts that we want to think of in our bridge or any other back bending poses. We want to stabilize our midsection, so strengthen the back and strengthen the core, and then open the chest. So in back bends, in our bridge pose in particular, we're going to think of grounding our feet into the floor, and we're going to keep neutral in our knees. So that means we don't want our knees to, I'll turn this way so you can see, except I'm in all black, so it's a little bit hard. We don't want our knees to come together, but instead we want our thighs to be neutral. So that as we lay down, and we put our feet right underneath our knees. So we don't want to be too far here. We don't want to be too far out. So just think of trying to line up our foundation and our bones. So the weight goes in our heels. And then if our knees are, we can be a little bit in front of our knees to help protect the knees. But as long as we have the knees not going over the toes like this, then that protects the knee joint a little bit better. So think of feet right underneath the knees, and that's a good place to start from, and then you can adjust from there. And we're going to press down through the feet. We're going to use the strength of our thighs to lift our hips up off the ground. And we don't have to go super high in lifting the hips, right? We can actually just have our hips in line with our thighs like this. And then we're going to bring the shoulder blades together. So I'm going to walk my arms a little bit closer together so I get some really good energy and muscular engagement in my shoulders in the back. And that allows us to open up in the front. So remember, we're stabilizing through our back and our core, and we're opening our chest or our heart, right? So this is bridge pose. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to look to the side like I am as I'm talking. You would want to look just straight up, so that our glutes are engaged, our thighs are engaged, and we're a little bit of inner thigh engagement as we don't want our knees to completely collapse in, and we're going to lift from there and then lower down. So this really great stability builder in our legs, our hips, our core, and our back. Because our core, we want to pull it in as we breathe out to help assist. It's like an assister muscle for our back. So press up. And if you feel any tension in your low back, you want to think of broadening through the low back and engaging more in the lower part of the glutes. So that might just be a mind-body thing for you to practice. Think broaden across the low back and lift from the bottom part of your glutes. And then come down. Now, a good way to ensure that you're engaging the right muscles in your lower half of your body is to use that block. Remember, we covered blocks and props earlier in this segment. And squeeze it between your knees. And then press up. And that might bring some of the tension out of the lower back. And it shifts the energetic muscular engagement more in the thighs and in the glutes. And then come down. Now, if the instructor does more than one, or if you're feeling too much tension in the low back, it could be coming from the hip flexors. It's this muscle that kind of runs across the front of our hips and into our quads. So using this block, and we want to use it on this level. So it's not completely flat. Typically this can be really intense if we take it this third level. So keeping it here on the second level is kind of a good place to start. As we lift the hips up, taking it to the top part of the hips, and then letting our hips rest there, and you feel a really great passive stretch through our hip flexors. This is a good option if the low back is feeling a little too tense, or if your hip flexors are just a little too tight. And this is supported bridge, right? So that's our back bend. And the thing that I really recommend not doing after a back bend is pulling your knees into your chest, because that's a really intense counter pose. And instead, maybe just bring your knees from side to side, or put the feet together and the knees apart. Or opposite of that, knees together and feet apart. And that gives your SI joint, which is the part where the top of your hips meet your low back, a place to be neutral, as opposed to bringing the knees into the chest, pulls on the SI joint and can create too much tension there. All right, let's go now to our different types of passive stretches. And of course, this is not all inclusive. This is just some really common ones that you'll do in class, and some tips to help you modify, make it more comfortable, and some alignment tips so that you make sure that you are stretching from the right places. So one is a classic forward fold. And this is one where people always feel like they are not flexible enough. And I really want you to drop that fallacy that you have to be flexible in order to do yoga. Actually, people who are really flexible should not get more flexible. They should get stronger. People who are really inflexible should be working on their flexibility. And so that's really okay if you cannot touch your toes. And then intensity might come in a different form in yoga. You might be able to move through the standing poses just fine, but you get down and try to passively stretch, and that's where you feel the intensity. So please get it out of your mind that yoga is only for flexible people. It's for all people. It's just that we all have different things to work on because we have different bodies. So if you're really, really flexible, you need to work on being more active in a pose. And if you're really, really inflexible, you need to work on kind of relaxing into that passive stretch. So this is one of those passive stretches that a lot of people may get in their mind. They're like, oh, I'm just really inflexible. I can't do yoga. So first of all, I want you to think of those two bones in your butt, and they need to be pulled back so that they're right underneath your shoulders. Because oftentimes the people start with their sitting bones kind of tucked under them, and they're already rounded in their spine. And then they try to stretch from there, and they get a stretch in their back and not in the hamstrings, which is what we're targeting in this pose here. So think of lifting the hips up and back, pulling back through these hip points. And then long spine. And then you come forward. When you start to round into the back, that's where you need to stop. So your stretch might be here, and that's perfectly fine. Your stretch might be a little bit further, and it could be here. That's perfectly fine too. So some tips to make this a little bit less intense so that you can kind of start to relax into the passive part of the stretch is bend the knees a little bit. You can even use a block to support underneath the knees. And this is a really great, I mean, like, look at that. Like, I immediately increased my range of motion in the stretch. Okay? So that's one way to increase your range of motion in the stretch. Another one is to use this lovely little strap. Kind of lasso your feet. We want the feet to be pointing back towards the face so that we have some active thighs, and that helps us to help safely release this passive stretch. We want the stretch to come from this middle of our hamstrings. So not where that sitting bone is, and not the back of the knee. So if you feel either one of those, let's adjust and bend the knees, and that will help the stretch come from the middle part of the muscle instead. Okay? So doing this little strap here will help you stay long in your spine as you come forward, and then you can simply drop the head, keeping the length in the spine as you breathe into the pose. This feels really good. I ran today, so. All right, so forward folds. Next are going to be hip stretches. So one of the classic poses of yoga is called half pigeon, and it typically looks like this. From down dog, we step and we set up our shin to where it's parallel, and then we adjust from there. And so both of our hip points are facing the ground, and then we come down. Now this can be really, really, really intense, right in here, or the inner thigh, because of the way this leg is positioned. So I'm going to show you, first of all, how to do this one on your back, because it's a really intense posture. If you have super tight hips, this might be unhealthy for you to start in this pose, and you should instead start with one where you can more control the intensity so that you don't harm your hip. That will be on your back, and it's the same kind of concept. We still want to have that parallel in the shin, but we're going to use the opposite leg to help us. So instead of having the shin against the floor, we have it against the leg, and we get to control the depth of this stretch. Now, if it's really super tight and you can't reach your leg, that's where this strap is going to come in handy, and we can bring it around the thigh so that our upper body can rest and relax, and we can pull on the strap instead to help hug in and open up the hip on this side. So if you have knee issues, this is a really good one to take so that we don't have the full weight of our body against our knee. Or if you have tight hips, this is a good one to take so that you can control the depth of this pose. Now, if you are ready to take this one forward and you don't have any existing conditions that would be like, no, you don't need to do this one, then I want you to use a block. So we set it up. We lengthen this back leg behind us. We align our hips towards the ground, but we're still like, you know what, I can be here, but I would really like to be a little bit more comfortable in this pose. So you grab that block, bring it underneath the glute muscle, and then that way you can rest a little bit more comfortably in the posture without that super, super intense, like not all poses have to be really, really intense in yoga. Okay, so that's a nice little hack for our hip openers. Some more accessible hip openers are really just going to be cross-legged positions, as we're just looking for the knees to be out and externally rotated in the thighs. So cross-legged positions are really great, more simple ways to open the hips. Right? So now we're going to talk about twists. And we talked about twists earlier on, but now since we're on the ground, we have those same principles that we want to apply, but just kind of showing you different ways to do them. One of the common ones to do is a knee bent and twisting to the direction of the bent knee. So this is one way to do it. Bend the left knee, put the left foot flat on the ground. I'm going to use my opposite arm to help me twist in the pose. This hand, the left hand, is going to go behind me to help me sit up nice and straight. So since I'm on the ground, my hips are going to be even. Remember we talked about that in chair and our crescent twist. We want the hips to be even and stable so that the twist comes from here and up and not from our low back and down. So we'll twist, sit up nice and tall, and I'm twisting from my belly up through the upper back, and I'm controlling it with my arms. So my arms are nice and strong. my belly is pulled in and my spine is really long. Now, if it is accessible to you, you could step this foot over the straight leg, which gives you even more depth in the hips. So you're adding a little bit of hip opening to this twist. Still staying long in the spine so you can see how tall and straight my posture is. And I'm making sure that this outer hip is pressing down towards the ground so the stretch is coming from the hip. And I'm still going from belly to upper back as I twist to the side. So use your arms to assist you, and then you find what is best and safe for your body to allow you to twist in this pose. Okay? So that is our on the mat types of stretches. It of course is not all inclusive. There's lots of different variations, but here are my tips for you as a beginner. First of all, if you are new to yoga, even if you physically can go run a marathon, I really highly recommend that you take a beginner class, because yoga does have like its own language, and there's lots of different postures and variations, and you really need to learn your body and what it can do, what is a no-go for your body, and how to safely get in these poses. Because we're dealing with muscles, ligaments and tendons and joints, you want to approach your practice safely. You want to start turning on muscles that you may not use on a regular basis. So if you go out and run and you use those big muscles, we're going to be using smaller muscles to help stabilize the joints, and you might not have quite that mind-body connection just yet, and you need to establish that by going to some of those beginner classes and learning the jargon, learning what your body needs. And the second thing that I highly recommend is, if you're a beginner without any physical practice, starting in those beginner classes will allow your body to gently start to move and kind of get used to movement that you're not doing. So once you establish, and we help people with that, like absolutely reach out to us and ask us, hey, like here's what I do on a regular basis for exercise. Here's how much I know for yoga. And then the third thing is, here are my goals. So you might be a marathoner who's like, you know what, I just need to stretch. I don't need to go to a power class. I'm good. I just need yoga to help me down-regulate my central nervous system, help me chill out, help me stretch, because I'm not good at doing that on my own. Or maybe you are a marathoner and you're like, you know what, I don't cross-train, and my core really sucks and I need to stretch too, but I really need some strength in my body. And we can point you to the right classes to go to. And then if you're a beginner and you're like, well, I haven't been exercising, I really don't do much, but I need to get stronger, but I don't know what I'm doing, or I need help and guidance more in a class than a faster class with heat especially, then we're going to point you into the right classes that way. So please talk to your studio or your instructor. We really love to help and make sure that people are successful, because that's what helps you be consistent in your practice, is if you feel successful. And if you're successful and you're consistent, that is where you see physical, mental, emotional results. You're not going to see that if you're not consistent, if you're just coming once a month. If you go to a yoga class once every 3 months and you're like, well, I'm not getting more flexible, if that's your goal, you've got to be more consistent to be able to see those results. Okay? So thank you so much for taking our virtual Yoga 101. Here are the codes for you to get a discount on our in-studio Yoga 101 or our in-studio intro offer. And then if you'd like to check out our virtual offerings, please head to this page of our website and you can check out those virtual offerings. So we do have a live stream archive page with lots of styles, from fitness classes to slower style classes that would include our beginners and our yin and our deepen classes, plus our power flows, which are going to help you get really strong. Thank you so much. Magic happens here at Yoga Story, and we'd love for you to make magic with us.